important and, in fact, is a serious issue. Therefore, this kind of orientation program can bring about greater coordination between the offices of the legislature, secretariat, and the offices of the government, which is very necessary for the smooth functioning of the system. After all, we have a parliamentary system, and where the parliament or the assembly are the representative bodies of the people. And the executive is responsible, accountable to the legislature, whether it is parliament or the state legislatures. The executive is responsible to the legislature. So legislature has a place of primacy in the whole scheme of things. And that is how the Constitution has designed it. Therefore, there has to be better coordination between the legislature secretariat and also the executive. Now, so far as the issue that I will speak on is concerned, we know that we have a federal system in this country. The Constitution has designed for us a federal kind of system. But in the real sense, in the classical sense, we are not a real federal country, like in America. But the basic feature of a federal system is the division of legislative power between the union and the states. So from that point of view, we have a federal system. In fact, our Constitution does not use this word at all. The Constitution merely says that India is a union of states. But when we look at the scheme of division of the legislative power, when we know that we have a federal system with more unitary features. So when I was speaking about the division of legislative power between the union and the legislature, state legislatures, here the state has exclusive power to deal with all the items in the state list. And the union, the parliament, has legislative power on all the issues, all the items which are there in the union list. But there is one more list, concurrent list, where both can legislate. But if there is a legislation, if there is a law made by parliament, and if there is a law made by the state on the same subject, and if there is a repugnancy, that means inconsistency between these two legislations, then the parliament's made law will prevail. And to the extent of repugnancy, the state law will be invalid. So this is the scheme of concurrent list, concurrent legislation. I will come to that a little later. But then, if you look at very carefully the various provisions contained in the Constitution which deal with the division of legislative power, you will find these people should be asked to keep quiet. They're disturbing me, actually. Ask them to get out of this place. They're actually disturbing me, Ask them to go out of this hall. In fact, there are many occasions where the union government, the parliament, steps into the area which is reserved for the state. That we must understand. We must have a clear idea about that. There are many areas. Although state has exclusive power to legislate on all the subjects which are brought under the state list, but the union, the parliament, gets power on certain occasions to legislate on these subjects. So to that extent, there is an erosion of the legislative authority of the state. Number one, if Rajya Sabha passes a resolution, by 2/3 of the members present and voting, Parliament gets the power to legislate on a subject which is in the state list on the ground that it is necessary to make a law in the national interest. So the national interest has been brought in by the Constitution, under which the state's power to legislate gets eroded, diminished. स्टेट का जो पावर है कानून बनाने का, उसका ह्रास होता है. So that is one encroachment by the union onto the power of the state legislature. Then there is another provision under which, if two or more states say that we need a law by parliament to deal with certain issues, and parliament will be very happy to do that. So there will be a law, and that law can be adopted by any other state. That is another occasion when the parliament encroaches upon the domain of the states. Then, you know that all of you are aware that when there is an emergency, then Parliament gets the power to legislate on all matters which come in the state list. So that means that there is a total negation of federalism when there is an emergency in the country. These are some of the things which are very important, crucial to the existence of a federal system. But our Constitution itself allowed this erosion of the federal system through these provisions. Now, you know, the union government, if you go through articles starting from 245 to 258A, all these articles deal with the powers of the union government vis-à-vis the states. We must understand it very clearly. 245, of course, deals with the division of legislative power, and then it goes on. When there is a repugnancy, I already mentioned about that. When there is a repugnancy between the central law and the state law on a subject which comes under the concurrent list, there the parliamentary law will prevail, and the state law will become invalid to that extent, to the extent of repugnancy. There are many issues, many things which come under the concurrent list. Education comes under the concurrent list. And here, you know, some time back, there was an issue in one of the states where a vice chancellor was removed because he was appointed not in accordance with the regulations issued by the University Grants Commission. Because University Grants Commission laid down certain regulations for the appointment of vice chancellors. Now, it's a very interesting subject. If you look into the powers of the University Grants Commission, then you will find that this is a regulation which they have no power to issue. Because if you look at the University Grants Commission Act, you will find that there is no mention about appointment of vice chancellors. No mention about vice chancellor's appointment. University Grants Commission lays down the standards of universities and things like that. Not about the vice chancellor's appointment. Because earlier, the subject was purely a state subject. Later on, it was brought under concurrent list because the union government also wanted to have a decisive say in the whole thing. That is why it was brought under concurrent list. But then this vice chancellor had to go. So the point is that there is a law made by the parliament which encroaches upon the powers of the state government. Appointing a vice chancellor in a state university, most of the universities, except the central universities, most of the universities are set up by the states under the state law. And University Grants Commission had no authority to issue regulations because nowhere is it mentioned in the Act that the University Grants Commission has the power to issue a regulation in the matter of appointment of vice chancellors. Where do they get this power from? You cannot issue in subordinate legislation without there being a provision in the Act, in the Parent Act. Because the subordinate legislation means the rules can be framed only within the framework of the parent provision. If there is no parent provision in the Parent Act, then what is it based on? Where do you get the power from? Nobody is asking these questions, Because the government is so powerful, the executive is so powerful, particularly the union executive. So everything goes. That is the attitude. So this is what happens when there is an encroachment on the power of the state. I'm just citing just one example. There are many examples to show the way in which there is a kind of an encroachment on the authority, on the domain of the state and the state legislature. Then, if you go to Article 256, what does it say? It says two things. One is that the union government can issue directions to the states to ensure that the state complies with the law made by Parliament. That is the power which union government has. They will say, you must implement the Parliament law. Of course, there is nothing wrong about it. They should have that. But then there is another provision which says that the executive power of the state can be used in such a way as to enable the union executive's powers or directions to be implemented. That means the state executive should not impede or obstruct the enforcement of the central directions. And union government can issue a lot of directions on many issues. Now this is a wide kind of power which union government has got. You know what happens if there is a defiance of the directions coming from the union government? क्या होगा उससे? आप defy करेंगे, उसको उल्लंघन करेंगे. Then you must go to Article 365. It says that if the states defy the directions issued by the union government के direction का आप उल्लंघन करेंगे, then the president will conclude that there is a breakdown of the constitutional machinery in the state. Then what happens? Then comes Article 356. So there is a ground for the union government to intervene under Article 356 and taking away the power of the state government. Now this is something happens, and this is provided for in the Constitution. All these things are provided for in the Constitution. This is what happens. And, the dispensations change in the, at the center. And some parties which come to power there, they have an inclination to usurp the powers of the states, encroach upon their areas, curtail their powers, diminish their powers, and all that. This kind of a tendency has developed. In fact, during the past 75 years, if you look at the history of the executive in this country, we can say that it has assumed gargantuan proportion. It has become so big. The executive has become all-powerful in this country. And when that happens, of course, when the political executive becomes very, very powerful, then naturally the bureaucratic segment of the executive will also become very, very powerful. And then what happens is the legislature becomes weaker. So that balance is upset. We have an all-powerful, gigantic executive, and we have a meek legislature. And what is the basic function of the legislature? To oversee the functioning of the executive, to ensure the accountability of the executive. The executive is always accountable to the parliament or to the legislature. That becomes impossible. That is what happens, or that is what is happening in this country over a period of time. I don't blame anybody, but this is a trend which is developing in this country, and people must be aware of it. That is the thing. Then I come to another aspect of this issue. The Honorable Chief Minister was referring to the role of the governor, the governor's power and the governor's control over the government and so on and so forth. Now, this is an issue which has become very important. What are exactly the powers of the governor? The Constitution says that there shall be a governor in whom all the executive power of the state is vested in him, which he will execute in accordance with the Constitution and so on. There are two things which you should remember. One is that the governor has to act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. The other thing is that the governor has certain discretionary areas. These are two things which a governor has, which the president doesn't have. The president does not have any discretionary powers, but the governor has. But those discretionary powers are limited to the management, control, administration of the scheduled areas and so on. Those functions are performed by the governors in the northeastern states and maybe some other states. But these are all laid down in the Constitution. That is why the Constitution says by or under the Constitution. These discretionary powers are provided for by or under the Constitution. Those discretionary powers can be exercised by the governor without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Otherwise, the constitutional scheme is that the governor can exercise the executive power only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. What does it mean? That means the governor in our Constitution, under our Constitution, does not have any power to act independently. In fact, right from 1974, from Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab, the Supreme Court has been consistently holding that the governor cannot act independently. He can act only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. And if you go back to the Constituent Assembly and go through the discussion in the Constituent Assembly and the reply given by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to the discussion, it is clear Ambedkar had said there is no function which the governor can perform independently under our constitution. And then the Supreme Court, right from Shamsher Singh down to Nawab Rabia in 2016, consistently the Supreme Court has been holding that the governor cannot act independently. He has no independent authority. He is the constitutional head. Constitutional head means he is the head of the state, but only in terms of constitution. So far as executive powers are concerned, these are vested in the Council of Ministers, who are responsible to the legislature, which is responsible to the people. So that is how the system works here. But if the governor oversteps his bounds, and if the governor starts thinking that he has powers which he can use without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, then there will be problem, serious problem, which will upset the whole system. Recently, you may be remembering, recently there was a case of a governor of a state, that is Tamil Nadu, dismissing a minister, which is unprecedented. Under Article 164 of the Constitution, ministers are appointed by the governor only on the advice of the chief minister. A governor cannot just pick up somebody and make him a minister, howsoever much he may like him, because chief minister has to advise, and only on the advice of the chief minister, the governor will appoint a minister. Then how does he get the power to dismiss a minister without the advice or recommendation of the chief minister? In this particular case, this is precisely what happened. There was no advice or recommendation from the chief minister. Even without the knowledge of the chief minister, the governor just issued an order dismissing the minister, saying that I have withdrawn my pleasure. Of course, if you look at Article 164, and if you take it literally, then you might get an impression that the governor, because it says that Article 164 says that the ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of the governor. Now, what exactly is the pleasure? You are all officers. You know very, very well aware of the pleasure doctrine. But here it is a different kind of pleasure. The governor has the pleasure so long as the chief minister has confidence in that minister. That is precisely what it means. Because the minister continues in a cabinet so long as he has the confidence of the chief minister. And if the chief minister loses confidence in that minister, he has to go. So the pleasure of the governor ceases when the chief minister loses confidence in that minister. That is all what it means. You know where the confusion has arisen. Some governors seem to think that they have the authority to dismiss a minister because Constitution says that the minister shall continue to hold office during the pleasure of the governor. You know, in the Government of India Act of 1935, from which we have copied most of these things, and we have used the same terminology which was used in the Government of India Act of 1935. So there also, these words are used. The ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of the governor. And we have virtually copied that. But these were two different situations. 1935 Government of India Act was framed during the British period, that is the colonial period. And there the governor was all powerful. He was the real ruler. There was no government, there was no executive, there was no political executive to aid and advise him. That was not necessary. He used to do things as he wished. And there the provision was very clear. Section 51 of the Government of India Act of 1935 is very clear on this point. It says a governor can appoint, the word used is choose. The governor can choose a minister and also dismiss him under his discretion. So there the governor has been given discretionary power to choose the minister and dismiss him. But that has been omitted in our Constitution. that the governor can choose a minister and dismiss him at will has been omitted from our constitution. What does it mean? It means the constitution makers did not want the governor to choose a minister and also to dismiss him under his discretion or in his discretion. Now this is very clear. This is very clear. Then how does the governor dismiss a minister? Of course, he has withdrawn that within 3 hours or 4 hours. That's a different issue. But the point is that the governor in our country thinks of dismissing a minister without the recommendation or advice of the chief minister. That is a major issue which has come up. Then there is another issue which I must bring to your notice. That is the assent to a bill passed by the assembly or the state legislature. When then bill goes to the governor, there are many instances where the governor has sat on the bill without taking any decision. Now, what exactly is the authority which the governor has to sit on the bill? He doesn't have any authority, in fact. Because Article 200 is very clear. It says, when a bill is passed by the assembly, it shall be sent to the governor. There are 4 options which have been laid down in the constitution. 4 options for the governor. One is that he can give assent, of course, or he can refuse assent, or he can send it back to the assembly for reconsideration. He may suggest certain things and ask the assembly to reconsider them. And if the assembly reconsiders, not if, assembly has to reconsider it. When the assembly, after reconsidering this, if the assembly passes the bill in the same form in which it was passed earlier, that means without accepting any of the recommendations of the governor, then the governor has to give assent. Then the 4th option is to send it to the president for his consideration. These are the 4 options given by the constitution to the governor. There is no 5th option of sitting on the bill. In fact, governors are sitting on the bill, and when they do that, they are not acting in accordance with the constitution. That is what I am saying. Because there is no 5th option given in the constitution. Unfortunately, I don't know. That is where the role of the officers comes. Politicians or governors, because most of the governors are politicians in our country, they may not know the fine print of the constitution. They may not know all the various provisions of the constitution, or they may be having some misunderstanding. But it is actually the officers who have to apprise the governor of the real constitutional position, the real legal position, whenever an issue comes up. Governors are high constitutional authorities, and they are described as the constitutional head. So they must address issues with impartiality, objectivity, and with great maturity. Should not get involved in politics and all that. So they should look at it from legal and constitutional point of view. And when a bill is sent to the governor has to exercise one of these 4 options. And that should be the end of it. Just imagine a governor sitting on a bill for 1 year, 2 years, and so on. And what is the use of assembly passing a bill? After all, a bill comes before the House when the government feels that there is a need, urgent need for a legislation on a particular subject, affecting the life of the people. And when such a bill is passed by the assembly, if the governor, who is not responsible to the legislature, who is not responsible to the people of that state, he sits on it. That means the governor is virtually defeating the very object of making a law and negating the, the work of the legislature. That is what actually happens. So these are some of the things, which the officials must point out to the governor. But that, I do not know, for maybe for political reasons, things are not happening that way. So this is another issue, which is very important. And the officials, they are supposed to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law, because they have only to look at the Constitution. In the Lok Sabha, I was there for 40 years. So many important legislations were made. And the moment we joined that secretariat, we are told that you don't look at the political complexion of the House. That is none of your concern. You look at the rule. When a question comes before you, if you want to admit it, you admit it on merit. You recommend the admission of this question on merit. When an adjournment motion is given notice of by the members, आपको इसके मेरिट पर जाना है. आपको ये नहीं देखना है कि किसने दिया है ये नोटिस. That is the position. So that is the way in which bureaucrats should function. They should look at the Constitution and the rules and advise the political executive accordingly. If that is done, I think many problems can be solved. But sometimes it so happens, I make bold to say, it so happens that bureaucrats also forget the line. Sometimes they cross the line, and then there will be problems. These are some of the things which I wanted to point out. I do not want to prolong this. I think I should conclude my speech here. And I would suggest, of course it is of your consideration also, Chakshu Roy, that this kind of an orientation program should be a one-time affair. It should be held as frequently as you can, maybe once in a year or something. Because, as the Honorable Chief Minister said in the beginning, when he was inaugurating it, there should be greater coordination between the government officials and the legislature secretariat's officials. If the government officials think that we are the executive, we are powerful, we are all powerful, and we don't have to bother about what these people in the legislature, that is not the way. Because legislature secretariat can create a lot of problems. And there will be tension, and there will be some kind of friction and all that, which should be avoided. So for that purpose, there should be a greater understanding of the role of each other, I think. There are many occasions when I received notice, I received requests from the Defense Ministry, on the External Affairs Ministry and all that on certain questions, which were very sensitive. But then I always, as a Secretary General, I used to tell them, look here, this is an issue which needs to be decided by the Speaker, and the Speaker alone. Speaker ko ही decide करना है, government को नहीं है ये. You have made a request, I will bring it to the notice of the Speaker, let the Speaker decide. So the message was clear. That is how the system works, The legislature has to maintain its place of primacy. And the offices and the political executive should allow the legislature to remain at that level. That is it. Legislature is the most powerful organ of the state, which makes law for this country. And the whole executive is responsible to the legislature. So the whole scheme of the constitutional scheme has been designed to achieve that purpose. So let us not defeat that purpose by not being loyal to the Constitution. By adhering to the Constitution, we will be certainly promoting harmony in the system and maintain the balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Achari, for your remarks on the constitutional provision between executive and legislatures. समय 1:30 बज रहा है, 1:30 से शायद 2-3-10 मिनट ऊपर होने वाला है, और जो ओरिजिनल प्रोग्राम था उसमें 1:30 बजे के बाद मेरे ख्याल से 10-15 मिनट का प्रश्नकाल था। तो मेरा आप लोगों से अनुरोध रहेगा कि अगर हम लोग 3-4 सवाल हैं अगर तो हम वो सवाल ले सकते हैं। और मैं आपको ये भी याद दिलाना चाहूँगा कि जितने ज़्यादा सवाल होंगे उतना हम लोगों का लंच थोड़ा सा डिले हो सकता है। तो आप लोगों के लिए मंच खुला हुआ है सवाल पूछने के लिए। अगर सवाल हैं तो हम उनके जवाब आचार्य साहब से ले सकते हैं। और हाँ सर,
जब हम लोग विधानसभा में विधेयक लेके आते हैं तो भारसाधक सदस्य के रूप में, मेंबर इंचार्ज के रूप में विभागीय मंत्री अथवा विभागीय मंत्री के रूप में विधानसभा में प्रश्नोत्तर हेतु प्राधिकृत मंत्री, इन दोनों के बीच में कौन हस्ताक्षर करेंगे? हु इज मिस्टर मेंबर इंचार्ज? हमारा ये कहना है।
मेंबर इंचार्ज का मतलब है, देखिए ना, वो वर्ड यूज किया हुआ है
जी,
इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में है
जी,
क्योंकि लेजिस्लेचर में मिनिस्टर बिल प्रस्तुत कर सकता है और प्राइवेट मेंबर भी बिल प्रस्तुत कर सकता है। तो मेंबर इन चार्ज ऑफ द बिल का मतलब है द पर्सन हु हैज एक्चुअली moved the bill in the house and who will be actually leading the discussion on the bill. He is the member in charge of the bill. So far as a private member is concerned, he is the man who is in charge, who is the member who is in charge of the bill. तो इसमें कंफ्यूजन कहाँ है?
कंफ्यूजन ये है सर कि हमारे विभाग यहाँ 3140 है, तो कुछ विभाग के उत्तर देने हेतु सदन पटल पर विभागीय मंत्री से इतर मंत्री प्राधिकृत हो जाते हैं।
मंत्री क्या?
जैसे समझिए सर, मैं परिवहन विभाग की तरफ से बोल रहा हूँ।
नहीं, मैं ये जो कंफ्यूजन मैं क्लियर करता हूँ। देखिए, विधेयक कौन प्रस्तुत करता है उसमें? कोई मंत्री तो है ना। कौन मंत्री है? विभागीय मंत्री है या दूसरा कोई मंत्री है?
दूसरा मंत्री करे तो सर विभाग का जैसे
नॉर्मली मैं नहीं जानता कि आपके सिस्टम में क्या हो रहा है, लेकिन नॉर्मली जो होता है, जो ये बिल प्रस्तुत करते हैं,
ठीक है,
उस कंसर्न विभाग के मंत्री, वो मंत्री कैबिनेट मिनिस्टर होगा या मिनिस्टर ऑफ स्टेट होगा, कोई भी हो, लेकिन उस विभाग के मंत्री होंगे, वही प्रस्तुत करेंगे। दैट इज द प्रोसीजर। वही प्रोसीजर पार्लियामेंट में हमेशा वही चलता है। और यहाँ पर कौन सा मंत्री है दूसरा? एडवोक मंत्री क्या? हाँ, वो तो अलग बात है। देखो ना, किसी मंत्री को ऑथराइज किया जाता है, वो ओनली टू प्रेजेंट द बिल बिफोर द हाउस, क्योंकि वो मिनिस्टर शायद उस वक्त नहीं होंगे, कोई उनके तबीयत खराब होने से वो आ नहीं पाए हैं, तो उस हालत में बिल प्रस्तुत करना है, उस हालत में शायद ऑथराइज तो करते हैं, लेकिन उसका रिप्लाई वगैरह तो उसके कंसर्न्ड मिनिस्टर ही दे सकते हैं, क्योंकि बिल एक फॉर्मेलिटी नहीं है। उस बिल पर जो डिस्कशन होगा और उसका जवाब ये जिसको ऑथराइज किया वो नहीं दे सकते, वो तो असली मंत्री ही दे सकते हैं।
थैंक यू सर।
Sir, you have told that the governor is the constitutional head of the state. But nowadays a tradition has come in fashion that the governors of the different states are making so many programs going into the fields, districts, and there the officers engaged there, DC, SP, and all officers are engaged there, and they interact with the people. But in the democratic system, we find that the minister or the honorable chief minister or the public representatives they are directly responsible to the government. In that case, we find here in our Jharkhand state also that so many governors have come and they have made programs into different districts, and there is a huge expense on the government treasury into their visits. Are they, my question is, should they go into the field or not? What the Constitution says about it?
The Constitution is very clear on this. There cannot be a parallel government or parallel administration in any setup, in any state. If the governor runs a kind of a parallel administration, which is not permissible under the Constitution, that is the thing. Now, a governor, because Constitution has made provisions for the governor to get all the information about the government and the government's activities. Governor doesn't have to go to the field and find out what is happening. He gets all the information from the Chief Minister, because Chief Minister is constitutionally bound to give him all information which the Chief Minister has, and also the governor can seek information about things from the Chief Minister. When that provision is there in the Constitution, where is the need for the governor to go around and organize meetings and meet people and this and that? That is not the role of the governor under the Constitution.
Thank you, PDD Saab, for your information, insights on the working of the Constitution. मैं समय देख रहा हूँ 1:45 हो गए हैं, and एक छोटा सा अनाउंसमेंट ये था कि आज का जो प्रोग्राम है वो यहाँ पर ख़त्म होता है. और अच्छा सर,
you spoke on the governor sitting over the bills sent by the government or sent by the legislature. Can I know the period the governor can sit over the bill? Because most of the times bills are sent by the legislature and the governor takes 2, 3, 4 months and sometimes returns the bill, sometimes doesn't take a decision. What is the time period given to the governor in the Constitution, please?
Constitution does not prescribe any particular timeline. That doesn't mean that the governor can see. First of all, the Constitution does not permit the governor to sit on it. What I'm explaining, I'm saying that there are 4 options given. The Constitution. Governor. That is. So, Constitution does not. Now, suppose it takes a little time. Our Constitution permits reasonable things. It is the President, Prime Minister, or any authority have some time. Can today into
will be on the first floor, and if you exit from this exit, the officers of the assembly will help all of us guide towards the location of the central hall. Thank you, Acharya Sahab, once again. Thank you.